So I had predicted this was coming fairly soon. I wasn't sure if it would be this soon, but I guess it sort of falls in line with their regular season schedule, that it would be Season 5 would be their final one. So that's going to be at the end of May, will be the final season of MultiVersus, and then it's going to close down after that. I was kind of curious what your perceptions on this matter were in general, but I've also got a few observations that I've made. And you're probably wondering, why does this even matter? Like, I haven't even played MultiVersus since Season 1 or 2. I think I stopped at the end of Season 1, to be honest. I thought this was a game with actually quite a lot of potential, and even though I didn't love several things about it, in fact, it being a live service game in general is not something I'm especially fond of, and it was also an egregiously monetized and predatory live service game, but the ultimate gameplay under it was largely pretty good. It was better in some respects in the beta when things were sped up a little bit more, and I have questions about exactly what changed in terms of the tempo of the game. I have a feeling it might come down to network packets and their need to kind of keep gameplay a little bit more loose, so that way they could make things flow better. I could be wrong, though. I'm speculating in that front. But the whole game in general, I thought, has some enjoyable qualities to it, and they were sort of wrapped up in a lot of things that caused it to be problematic ultimately. So I didn't exactly want this game to fail, but in another way I sort of did, because I kind of thought that their hubris had gotten the better of them to a large degree. They were really pushing things in a direction that was way too much from a monetization perspective, and not that the devs should be getting punished for this, because they probably will be the ones ultimately, and I'm going to talk about that, but it's just one of those things where, like, the monetization being so frustrating is just, it's really the only thing you can focus on, and I think people got that picture fairly early on. If the drive of the game is not to make a fun, enjoyable game anymore, and the drive is ultimately, how can we convince people to spend as much money in this glorified shop, right? That's the priority. Well, people are going to see through that, and they're going to go, well, if this is the trajectory, why would I want to keep grinding away at it when ultimately I'm not being respected as a player of this game? My time isn't being respected. I don't feel like I'm making any progress here, and ultimately I'm contributing to a system which demeans and dehumanizes the people playing the game. So once those calculations are run by the most of the audience, they're going to go, well, why would I stay here? Even if I'm having a decent time moment to moment sometimes, it's in service of something that is ultimately worse. And I think that's what really ultimately led, and I said ultimately way too many times, it's what has led to the game failing, in part because it just didn't make enough money, I'm sure, but the reason it didn't make enough money is because there weren't enough people playing it, and the reason there weren't enough people playing it was because the game treated the players like crap. We felt exploited transparently by the way that they ran the game. Am I remembering this wrong, or was this also the game that required a couple of tries to get started? Yeah, so what it was they ran a beta, which was for quite a while. I think it was like better part of a year. And it was doing okay, but then they took it offline, which was a pretty bold move. And in the process of taking it offline, the idea was they were going to revamp a bunch of core elements of the game, come back with more content, with a better... well, they were updating it to a new engine, essentially. So they were going to have all sorts of things that were going to feel more responsive. The netcode was going to be better. All in all, things were supposed to be spiraling in a good direction for MultiVersus. So when they debuted the new version of the game, which we were calling the 1.0 version out of beta, what had happened in that time was Warner Brothers, my best understanding of it anyway, had kind of forced them to release this 1.0 version ahead of when they were fully ready to. So the bit that debuted was really underbaked, and the devs took a lot of heat for that. Maybe partially rightfully so. I don't know exactly what their moment-to-moment workflow was like. But they ultimately sold a game that wasn't really ready for prime time, and maybe they did it for poor reasoning, for reasons that were out of their control, because the publisher ultimately gets say over lots of things like that. And the things that had improved were largely overshadowed by the things that had gotten worse. And that was very frustrating, because they actually had built quite a substantial audience that was really kind of diehard about how good this game was. And hey, they convinced me even. I thought it was going to be a freaking joke of a game, and no, it actually was, like, pretty fun. It was enough that I wanted to keep coming back to it for a bit. I played it a bit in the beta. It was pretty fun at that point. No idea why they slowed the game down so much, though. As I said before, I think it was probably a hardware constraint thing where they were trying to make the net packets work better so it wasn't so laggy, and probably at the speed the game was running at, maybe connectivity was going to be an issue, but it could just not be that. It might have been just a creative choice. Because the question remains, like, after that debut of the 1.0 version, there was public outcry that this was like a bad version of the game. This was not enjoyable in the same way. So the devs clearly got the point that people weren't happy about the tempo changing, but they never adjusted it in the ensuing year that the game was out for. So they obviously just didn't agree, right, that that was the better way to go, or they couldn't change it, one or the other, I suppose. So I've seen a lot of kind of panic and frustration and anger and misplaced blame on the subreddit about this. A lot of finger pointing, a lot of like, well, if they only released better characters, then it would have saved the game. Things like that. Speculation that's kind of based on, well, very little in reality, because you don't have any idea if any better characters would have changed anything. What did we tell you about Reddit? It's still an interesting perspective, though, to see what people are saying about the game, even if I disagree with a lot of it. Mrs. doesn't care about Reddit's opinion. Well, my point was going to be that a lot of folks are pointing fingers at the developer, Player First Games, for mishandling the property and essentially fumbling the ball when they had everything essentially ready to go, and all they needed to do was execute properly, and they just didn't have the ability, right? And I just find that so super strange to know that this was a title under the umbrella of Warner Brothers, and to still go after the devs when they've got a history. Warner Brothers have a history of mishandling properties too, and they actually have done this same thing multiple times, talking about how they need a live service portfolio in their games catalog, talking about how this is the future of games and how this is what they want to put all their investments into. And I just think it's super weird that people would still kind of take the bait and be like, actually, it's the devs who are the problem, not the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. Because that just seems bizarre to me, right? Like, why would you say that? I'm not saying that the devs may have played no part in it, and I don't know the specifics to which their agreement was made contractually, but to assume malice on the devs' part, like, do you really think that the devs would want to release the game in an unfinished state? That only makes them look bad. It doesn't make Warner Brothers look bad, because Warner Brothers gets to hide behind the devs. Do you think that the devs would want to monetize the absolute hell out of the game just to do it? It's not like they're gonna make more money as a result. They don't have a financial incentive to do that. They're gonna make the money that was already pre-agreed in the contract before they produce the game. Like, at the end of the day, Warner Brothers is the one who is going to make the financial decisions about how the game is run. They're the ones providing the money. They're the ones that are, you know, where the buck stops, right? So it seems really oddly, overly simplistic to look at PFG and go like, why did you just do this badly? Are you dumb? Like, what? Do you really think that people are that bad at their jobs that they would intentionally shoot themselves in the foot and then be like, well, there's nothing we could do? It's very much a situation where they have everything to lose and nothing to gain, and they can't out the publisher. And the unfortunate fact here is, very likely, the whole team is going to be dissolved as a result of Warner Brothers' bad decision-making, if I'm reading the situation correctly. Because I will open the possibility that I could be wrong on some fronts here, but this is the trend that I've seen happening over and over and over again. Publisher makes bad decisions, the developer takes the heat for it, developer gets dissolved, maybe a couple of the higher echelon from their group gets shuffled into some other positions, but then 85% of the team gets laid off. And then on we go. Time for the next live service, let's invest in that one. Hey, it's the best thing ever. And so I was just kind of curious, like, what's your read on that? Do you think I'm speaking out of turn? I mean, I haven't worked at Warner Brothers or Player First Games. I don't know about their internal corporate, culture. I don't know if their leadership was maybe not the best. I've heard quite a lot of reports that the lead game designer has some delusions of grandeur to a degree, but it's all anecdotal. I think you found bad opinions and they are bad. Well, bad or not, I think that they're worth at least mentioning, if only to elucidate the fact for new people that maybe don't understand how this works, that pointing fingers at the dev is not really always the right way to go. But maybe I'm preaching exclusively to the choir here, and maybe everyone in this chat does understand that now, or has already. I guess I just wanted to speak on it for a few minutes, because it just seems like it's indicative of a larger trend, as I'm sure you've seen, with like Suicide Squad and Concord and a variety of other live service games. I mean, Sony themselves have said that they're massively reducing the scope on their investment in live service games. And I don't know if you remember this, but at least a year ago I've said, I believe that the live service bubble is going to be popping fairly soon. And I think all of those things I just mentioned serve as kind of important data points in a structure around that belief. Live service games are on a decline, as far as I can tell. And I would only hope that we could start to take some lessons from those experiences and apply them to future projects. I feel like the bubble has popped already. Most of the big ones seem to fail. Well, I could probably make cases for why individual ones failed. I think we're still in a sort of cusp moment of it being between this has obviously gone wrong and things are mostly going wrong. I don't think we're in the, like, objectively everything is changed now yet, period. There are still live service games, as you said, Rivals is still succeeding. I thought Overwatch 2 was going to be done this year, but they've got a roadmap, actually, and they're going to be talking in another 2 weeks or so about what's ahead for the game. I believe genuinely that Overwatch 2 is absolutely, like, 1 foot in the grave, though. And I thought there were 2 feet in the grave, but I think maybe they're 1 foot in. They're a wounded animal right now, and they're, like, barely surviving the winter. And one prey, one moment of a wolf coming out of the woods is going to be the end. They're not going to project any of this publicly, because I don't know if you know this, but part of the calculation of making a live service game part of the calculation of making a live service game work is to project strength and to make your audience believe there's a future there to invest in. Because as I sort of already hinted at with MultiVersus, once people realize you don't have faith in your own project, why would you continue to grind on it? Why would you continue to spend money when you think eventually this game is going to go away and all of your, whatever you spent on is going to go with it? So they have to project strength to the audience, and no matter what the case is in the office, I mean, they could be all SOS and red alarms blaring when they get back to the office, but when they go out in front of the camera, everything's good, man. We're gonna have the best season ahead of us. Season 15 is gonna be the start of a brand new beginning for Overwatch 2. That's the the face they've got to put on. But then they go back and they're like, actually, I don't know if I can go to work anymore. Like, it's just miserable. Yeah, it's really scary, though, to think that, like, all of these years of them building towards something with Overwatch, and it could just be, like, a dice throw away from being over. I'm very curious to see what they're going to say is the future for the game publicly, because I think I'll be able to read between the lines fairly well, as I've tried to do for the last several years. I'm so glad I told my friend, "Are you nuts?" every time they told me Blizz was hiring. Yeah, good call. The only reason that I would ever recommend someone try to work for Blizzard at this point, and I don't even know if this holds any water anymore, I'd say would be to just have them on your resume, to basically show that you've been able to go through the corporate onboarding process that is working for Blizzard, to then probably get laid off in 6 months at most. It's a hell of a journey to want to go on, though. I don't know why someone would subject themselves to that, to basically have an entirely volatile career, where you're probably going to be subjected to some of the worst industry practices to barely make enough money to survive in California. Tell people you worked at Blizzard. Does that even carry much weight anymore, though? Thanks very much, Swift Shiftly, for the 101 months. You've got one for every Dalmatian now, and I respect and appreciate that. Thank you, Swift. If somebody told you they worked for Blizzard, would your next question not be, in what era? Did you work for Blizzard in, like, 1998? Oh, okay, we're cool. Did you, or maybe we're not, depending on what department you worked in, to be honest. Were you hanging out around the corporate fridge? Do you know about the Cosby Suite? No? Okay, we're cool. Did you work for Blizzard in 2020? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you okay? Do you need help? You know? My reaction would be something like, "That's rough, buddy." Ugh. It's a nightmare. Again, I want to further mention that mostly Team 4 was immune to all of this crap. They had their own issues, but they were like mismanagement issues largely, and Bobby Kotick issues, and Activision live service issues. They weren't really like scandals, though. None of this, like, breast milk story shit. None of that, thankfully. I always feel like I have to say that because, like, I couldn't summon the strength to speak in any way about the same teams that worked on some of the games that were then involved in those things. Ugh. I think it was mostly Warcraft stuff, right? It was a little Diablo, a little Warcraft. There was some other point I was going to bring up. Oh, there's somebody that's starting, like, a petition. That's like, MultiVersus can't die. If enough of us sign the petition, then it'll stay, I guess, after they've said that the servers will go offline. And, like, no, that's not how any of this works. I'm sorry. I understand. You're very hopeful, and I don't mean to crush your spirit. I appreciate that you're so idealistic, but, like, that's not... They don't care about your petition. I'm sorry. There's also been people saying, so why can't we just leave the servers on after the game has no new content? And, well, several reasons, in fact. Number one, it's a game centered around live service content, which involves a lot of licensed characters, which, yes, Warner Brothers owns, but there's still contractual obligations and legal meandering to be done. They're not going to invest those resources. They don't simply want to keep bothering renewing licensing for things that it's not going to make them any money. And I'm not even saying that in like a I'm just being negative way. Like, I don't think I would make that choice if I was them either. There's also, if you leave the servers on, well, you need maintenance crew, you need developers to patch bugs, you need all sorts of upkeep in general to be able to make sure the server infrastructure is still going. And then there's also the factor that, like, the game wasn't programmed to have peer-to-peer server infrastructure in the first place, because they knew it was a live service game that would depend on the sort of implicit licensing and consent of Warner Brothers continuing development on this thing. So I think it was baked in from the start that if this game was going to go offline, it was going to go all the way offline. Right? So they've even said, like, once the 30th rolls around, you won't be able to download MultiVersus anymore. You'll be able to play it offline, but you can't get it on Steam, you can't download it on PlayStation, you can't download it on Xbox. It's just going to go away. And so saying, like, why can't we just keep playing it is, I understand in a simplistic way, not crazy request, but from the perspective of, you know, the company licensing all of this stuff, it is actually quite a lot to ask. And you have to realize when you make your bed in the world of live service games with licensed characters, this is the most volatile possible way to do it. You're not going to have any longevity here. It is only here for the time that it's here, and in the moment it's not, it's not. Did they say they're removing downloads for solo and local play? I actually am not clear on the answer to that question. It would be kind of, dare I say, sort of cool if they would be like, here's the final version of the game. It's not going to be online, but at least we've unlocked all the content in it for you or something. I don't think they'll do that, though. You already can't buy Gleamium anymore, which is the premium currency that you use to buy cosmetic stuff. But I don't know if they'll at least unlock the characters. They may or they may not. I don't think they'll have a new system to deal with it, so they may just leave it in a sort of a messed up state and just call it a day. Well, it sounds obvious at face value that they wouldn't unlock all the content, because why would they, right? They're just giving stuff away at that point. But you already can't pay them for it now. So, in a way, what harm is it to do that? But I guess you could just say, like, in a sort of spiteful, backward way, they just don't want to encourage people not to buy things. It would devalue them as a property to give anything away, which is sort of the Blizzard methodology. They create a fake economy based around whatever they think things are worth, and then can't do anything to backpedal on that, otherwise it makes them look weak. Which is kind of surprising, actually, that they've decided to make, Blizzard, I mean, have decided to make a sort of a not-like-them move. Two, actually, in recent memory. So one of them is they had just said they were selling this Lucio skin recolor that was, you know, the usual, like, $20 price tag on the shop. And then, I think in an act of mismanagement or miscommunication, they also decided that same paid Lucio recolor skin was going to be getting given away if you watch their upcoming dev update stream on the, like, 13th of February. There's somewhere around there, 13-something. So they're just going to give away a $20 skin, and so they obviously got called out for that. Why would you give that away when you're charging money for it? And they actually just stopped charging money for it and are giving refunds to the people who actually bought it. So that's not like Blizzard. They also, very recently, I think as of either last night or the night before, went back on their promise that the Jade weapon skins that you get for playing comp in Overwatch 2, those used to be, they were going to be locked to the comp year of 2024, meaning you get 1 year to accrue as many of these Emerald or Jade weapons as you can, and then they're going to take them off the market. You won't be able to download, or you won't be able to get them anymore for any way. But now what they're doing is they're actually just going to move them into the Legacy department with the gold skins and add a new color as the new one. So, props. That's, like, actually kind of a nice thing to do. And one less bit of FOMO for no reason. What I'm hoping they'll do now, and we'll see when it comes to this dev update if they actually go along with it, is I'm hoping that they're going to take the Marvel Rivals approach to battle passes and allow you to simply keep them and work on them whenever you think is appropriate. it just seems like the only way to salvage a slightly more player-facing approach toward live services. I think it's the obvious win for them to take, because they'll get a surprising amount of goodwill for doing that for basically no downside. Does it really hurt them to do this in any way? No, people are still going to want the battle passes. They're still going to buy them. It just means they're going to be able to get all the stuff in the thing they bought, which it doesn't change anything. As a non-Overwatch player, I'm so confused to what all this means. Well, I was talking about the Jade weapons. It's a reward for playing enough games of competitive. If you grind out, I don't know, like a bunch of like 500 games, something like that. Depends on how many you win and how many you lose. You get more points that way. You will get the ability to have a weapon skin that makes your gun look emerald or jade. I keep saying emerald, it's jade. Which is like a flashy green blinky skin. It shows other people like, hey, I play this game a lot, basically. Right, so yeah, I don't really know why they wouldn't take the easy win on the battle passes. I think they should do that. And I just want to reinforce the fact that this is obvious, I know, but without competition, they won't change things. If we don't call them out for bad business practices, they won't evolve, they won't adapt, they won't try to do anything to make the game more enjoyable from a player perspective. And I think that Overwatch 2 could have been MultiVersus in a lot of respects. And I think in some respects, maybe it should have been maybe it should have deserved to be MultiVersus. They treated their audience with sheer contempt for months and months and months. And they've only gotten away with it because their starting audience size was so much larger than MultiVersus was. They really established themselves as being less predatory for years before they made that turn. And so there was quite a lot of people still baked into the audience that are like willing to overlook a surprising amount of things just to see if maybe we could get through it and get somewhere better. And they were happy to ride that as long as they could to try to extract the maximum profit from their audience. But maybe a little bit of competition in the form of rivals and maybe a little bit of fear of God in the form of MultiVersus failing and Concord failing and Sony downgrading their portfolio of live service games and Suicide Squad failing and, you know, it could go on. Maybe all of that shit is making them go, hey, maybe we need to, like, seriously take some of this on board and go, like, this isn't sustainable. What do we want here? Do we want to extract the most profit for the shortest amount of time, burn every bridge we've got, and then leave the game in rubble to never be looked at again? Or do we want to actually have any kind of legacy here where people can actually be interested in a thing that might somehow go on to get better? And I do think that internally, their development team has always been a little of both. But largely, when Jeff Kaplan was at the helm, he was holding some of their worst impulses back. And those impulses mostly came from the executives, I would guess. Now we've got Aaron Keller as the lead, and he's mostly okay. But we've also got Jared Noose, who comes from the Riot Games perspective of monetize first, ask questions later. And I think that the two of them have always been butting heads insofar as I don't think he agrees with a lot of the better business practices that need to be done to keep the game sustainable. He just wants to thrash and burn, get as much money and go. But it depends where you come from, right? Do you care about this thing you're working on, or are you just here to get a paycheck? And I know there can be both at the same time, but ultimately one tends to win over the other, and then once you involve shareholder needs and corporate pressure, the paycheck side just tends to win out a lot of the time, and the passion, well, it gets taken for granted and put in the back seat. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about MultiVersus in a multidisciplinary variety of directions, but I do think it's an important moment in what's going on with live service games and where maybe we can prognosticate the future of them might be, and I think the future is going to change, hopefully in a slightly more consumer-centric perspective over the next year. I can only hope, fingers crossed. I also think that we are vastly overestimating the generosity of the Marvel Rivals developer, NetEase, is it? They are not known for being generous, and I think that they know they needed to make a calculation when they came into this market that they needed to appear generous, or at least they needed to appear slightly better than the competition because they're on the back foot right now. They needed this game to survive long enough to get into the enshittification process where they can then have that market share where when they actually decide to turn the screw, it'll matter. Otherwise, if people bounce off too early, when they go to turn the screw and make everything even worse, it won't garner enough revenue for them to have done it. It would just be a waste of time and energy then. You have to look at all of these live service games like ticks, right? They want to gorge themselves on our blood. And they want to get really deep under your skin. So that way when they start feasting, it will actually hurt. They want it to be a big deal. They want to make all the money possible. And if they only get on the surface and they start sucking blood, well, you're just going to put a matchstick on it and that'll be the end of it. But if they can get really deep under your skin, really into your daily life, you know, with their live service practices, your daily claim, whatever, monetization things, whatever those things happen to be, habitually building psychology around it for their player base, then they can really get into your pocketbook long term. We're so eager to assume, oh, it's a video game, so like they probably don't mean any harm. Nah, if they could, they would mean all the harm. This is capitalism, baby. They know how bad it is. Once they've gotten to the point of weaponizing our psychology against us to try to take our money, I don't think you can look at them as good actors anymore. They're not here to make a fun game for people anymore. They're here to produce an addictive substance for us that they can gradually introduce more and more problematic aspects to. And as with drugs, the first hit's always free, hence why they are free-to-play games. So they lure us in with flashy Marvel characters and the promise of tons and tons of great content to come. And largely they've delivered on a game that is enjoyable to play moment to moment. But they've still got $20 skins. They're not revitalizing the genre in any way. All they've done is take the Halo approach to battle passes, which I think I would contest that we've moved the Overton window so far now that we're actually looking at battle passes as a net neutral. They're not a net neutral. Free-to-play isn't a net neutral. But we're just taking all of that for granted now because we're so used to it. So right, MultiVersus has failed. Hopefully it'll lead to better things and people pivoting off of that bad decision-making. I don't think it was Player First Games' fault most of the way, maybe partially, but I think it was largely WB's endless need to commodify and monetize until they destroyed the product, ultimately shooting themselves in the foot. Or maybe not, maybe that was the goal, maybe they didn't really like this thing that much and they just wanted to get rid of it. I'm definitely part of the problem, but I'm the chaos destroying them from the inside. I'm nodding and playing an incremental of which I've paid $0 while it's loaded with AIPs. I mean, I do that too. I have to be completely upfront with you. I play lots of live service games. I mostly don't spend any money on them. I am the anti-whale that the whales have to exist to allow to exist, if that makes sense. But the truth is, they don't need all the money. They could just need some of the money and could still make a product that is ultimately enjoyable and less aggressively monetized. They don't do that. They choose not to. They choose the worst path every time. And so some of them failing is needed. That maybe they could find a better way to do it. And then they turn us against each other to try to make it seem like we're not paying them enough. We're the problem. If we only could have supported MultiVersus more, at whatever price point they wanted to put on it, then maybe it could have still succeeded. Yeah, I mean, sure. If the billionaires asked for $6 billion more and we gave it to them, maybe they would have acquiesced, but they didn't, and we didn't, so oh well. I wish more devs behave like grinding gear games with PoE. Most of the pay content is really optional, and they give you a huge full game for free. I just don't think that the idea of tempting an audience with a, quote, free game is a viable way to do it most of the time. There might be a few edge cases where it works, but you're taking such a gamble, and in order to justify and validate that gamble, you've got to really go hard in ways that are just kind of predatory to make up for it. If you play the game a lot and just buy the pass, but not the skins with real money, you're just keeping the game running and something like paying for the server costs. Depends. I think that's a broad generalization. Depends on the game, depends on the scope, depends on the budget, depends on so many factors, depends on who's funding it. Depends on the point of the game, because there's probably games that exist that are sort of loss leaders for a brand. And honestly, Marvel could fit this template in a way. I don't think it is that, but I think it could fit this description where Marvel Rivals might not need to make as much money as it could because it functions as a sort of functioning marketing arm for Marvel as a whole, branding and marketing-wise. Sorry, sentence got away from me there. You could take a loss on Marvel Rivals potentially because it's raising brand awareness for the rest of whatever's going on. And it's a conduit for people to get invested in, where then when a new movie or a new TV show or a new whatever comes out, even another video game, there's going to be tie-in crossover content that hooks people into it, shows them that this thing exists, is a functional funnel to bring in an audience that then gets advertised to just by virtue of playing that game. So that's kind of a thing you would pay for normally, but they're actually having the players pay for their own marketing in a lot of cases. And I think that's, well, it's the same thing I got mad about with regard to Overwatch, where they've introduced crossover content with like Avatar and Cowboy Bebop and Porsche and various gamer glasses or whatever. Monster, Gentle Monster it was called. These are ads. For the 70th time, I know I've said this on the channel so many times, but I can't get away from the fact that people are willing to pay now to run ads on themselves. You're buying a One Punch Man skin for Doomfist, which means you're basically giving them money to put an ad into the game so other players will see One Punch Man and go, oh, maybe I want to watch One Punch Man. It's at least keeping the brand aware in their heads. And the players are so eager to just say, but it's fun. It's just a little bit of fun, right? What harm could come of that? Just want to look at Doomfist being One Punch Man. That's harmless. And like, yeah, I guess, but also no, because there's actually an agenda behind it. You're trying to put this stuff in front of people. That's marketing. That's buying ads. You're paying them to be advertised to. Simple as that. And when everything crosses over with everything else, that's the only way they start to look at the content. How do we mix in as many other brand opportunities rather than build our own unique world with our own lore and world building? Yeah, what's to stop Hatsune Miku and VTubers from showing up? When will, I don't know, Jacksepticeye have a Soldier 76 skin? I don't know why it would be him or them, but, you know, I'm just saying, all of that stuff could show up. And in a lot of games it is. And that's very frustrating. I'm being advertised to everywhere I go. Leave it alone. At the very least, even if you can't leave it alone, even if this stuff has to show up and we have no say in it, at least understand that it's marketing. At least understand that it's advertising and it's not just fun. You can have fun with it, but when we get into the discussion of why this is happening, they're not doing it for you because it's good times. It's so they can make more money. And the dishonesty there, or at least the ignorance there, is so frustrating to see that people will defend that they're just here doing it for the fun of the game because they love these properties so much. And then Aaron Keller will get up in front of the camera and say, look, I just love anime so much. I just like having anime involved in my game because I like it on a personal level. It's like, sure, that's literally probably true, but that's not why you're doing it. It might be part of the reason, but it's not why ultimately you're doing it. Just be honest, right? Like, you don't have to be brutally honest, but just be, like, base levels of honest. How do you feel about characters from another IP in a game like Meat Boy? Yeah, see, my perspective has probably changed a bit over the years, because at the time, I think I completely fell into the category of people that was blinded by the fun of it. And now that I've gotten to see the darker sides of the game industry and how cynical some of it tends to be, especially when you start dealing with AAA game development, it hits a bit different. I'm much more willing to see less harm in it being Meat Boy, because, I mean, it was genuinely an indie game promoting other indie games. And one of the things I've always been all about is I want to see these same people that are struggling to find an audience, and granted, Meat Boy didn't struggle after a point, but it did at the start. I want to see those game developers that have small games that aren't reaching much of an audience rise. I want to see them do better. I want to see them proliferate and spread that sort of attitude to other people. It's when you're on the top, advertising other things that are on the top, that it's more of a problem, right? Do you see the difference there? One is about just helping people get a foothold, and the other is about people already dominating, keeping other things down. So I'm not really as inclined to be upset about Meat Boy, but I do now see why it could have been frustrating, at least on some level. But I didn't find it that way to begin with. Yeah, and that's a great point as well. As you said, we're talking about an offline game. You know, Meat Boy was just a game that you would play by yourself. Whereas we're talking about live service games, multiplayer games, where you see other people making decisions that they want to advertise Avatar: The Last Airbender to you, so they put on their Katara skin on May, and you have to look at it because you're in the game with them. So you don't really have any control there. Did I get all of the things correct there? Was it Katara on May? I haven't watched Avatar in such a long time, I could barely remember. Did I say it wrong? When Nick said, do you see the difference there? The Irish accent feels like it's seeping in. Yeah, it is. I feel like my throat works differently now, and my tongue works differently now that I've been here for a bit. Oh, no, I was granting you might have been correct. I might have said it wrong. I can't remember how the character's name was pronounced. Katara. Oh, sorry. Okay. I think I've always said it wrong, to be honest. I did watch a lot of it. I think Avatar's a pretty good show, actually, and I loved One Punch Man. I don't want to just be a negative prick about all this stuff for the sake of being negative. I do like a lot of the properties that they're involving with this stuff. I just don't like them enough that I want to be advertised to. I've actually just rewatched One Punch Man quite recently, and I still think it's a very solid show. Maybe Season 2 is a little less so, but I really like the first season a lot. Yeah, and that's another factor, too, is not only is it... each property is finding its way into a lot of individual games, but some of these properties, like, as you said, Avatar, and I know there are a few other examples in this, they will show up in everything. The same few... IPs will just kind of be up for grabs, and they're just shopping the market to see who wants them. And so you'll just start to see them appear in all sorts of different games unrelated to each other, even mobile games and, you know, stuff that you would not really associate with a particularly high degree of quality. And so I think you're now associating your brand with them and whatever decisions they happen to make, spreading themselves so thin that they're everywhere. And I just feel like you're diluting everything in every respect across the board. Yeah, Snoop Dogg for some reason, exactly. Oh, I put up my E3... Sorry, not E3. My Game Awards VOD. And it took me a week of deleting background music. It's very surreal watching Snoop Dogg perform with no music playing. Just as an aside. So if you want to watch that, it's now up on YouTube, and it is kind of funny. There's also, like, a minute or so that's just not there. I don't know what happened, but it, like, cuts out for a bit. Maybe I lost connection on Twitch. Whatever. Doesn't matter. Alright, I think I've made my point about MultiVersus. You've probably heard me go on about this stuff 1,000 times already, but I thought this being a moment of inflection regarding live service games on the whole, I think it is probably a big time for everybody to kind of look at the state of the industry and what's happened with these over the last year or two and say, maybe we could salvage this into something better. Maybe live service doesn't have to be as bad as this. And it takes a few pretty big names to go down for that pivot to happen. Or, and this is more likely to be the case, no lessons will be learned. Money will still take precedence over longevity. And more of these games will continue to fail. And we can look at that and go, hey, you didn't make any informed decisions based on what MultiVersus did. Wow, that's super dumb. But, you know, we'll see which one happens over the next couple of years.